What is going on, movie freaks? James Hancock here. I'm back to shower a little love and affection on two of my all-time favorite filmmakers, Joel and Ethan Coen. Ethan might be on a bit of a hiatus for now, but Joel Coen has a new movie, The Tragedy of Macbeth, coming to Apple on January 14th. So I figured it was about time for me to do another one of my top 10 videos celebrating my favorite films and their incredible filmography. If you want my review for Macbeth, I'll include a link in the description below, but where to start with this topic? I've been watching movies by the Coen Brothers ever since I first saw Raising Arizona on HBO as a little kid, and I can still remember seeing an ad for the movie in the newspaper and not really knowing what to make of that little kid wearing sunglasses. The reason I bring this up is that every movie freak obviously has directors that they become obsessed with as an adult, but I found that I have a very different connection with the movies by filmmakers whose work I love both before and after my love affair with cinema officially got underway. And for me, that short list includes directors like David Cronenberg, John Milius, Paul Verhoeven, John Carpenter, and of course, the brothers Coen. It's hard to overstate the impact they had on me growing up. Throughout the 80s and 90s, basically all of my formative years, the Coens just kept cranking out one masterpiece after another, and almost always in a completely new genre, oftentimes completely reinventing that genre in the process. And I'm not even sure why, but I discovered all of their early work on home video. This period was the apex of the home video craze. I didn't manage to see my first Coen Brothers movie in the theater until I saw The Big Lebowski while I was in college. And I'll never forget sitting in a theater a few months ahead of its release, seeing the first trailer for Big Lebowski, whereupon one of my friends bellowed to the auditorium, "Yeah? Well, that was a lot funnier the first time when it was called Kingpin." Well, these days, I'm not sure how many folks remember Kingpin, but they certainly remember The Big Lebowski, which achieved legendary status as a cult classic in record time. My final year at UVA, everyone basically put on 20 pounds from chugging White Russians while watching that movie over and over again. In any event, for the last few days, I've been revisiting their movies and just drowning myself in interviews, my favorite of which was one conducted by Guillermo del Toro. Filmmakers always seem to ask better questions than journalists, but the Coens have this reputation for being men of few words, like when Ethan Coen just said thank you when they won the Oscar for the Best Adapted Screenplay for No Country for Old Men, and they're notorious for being very reluctant to overanalyze their work. The joke that some critics in interviews almost seem to want the Coens to do the critics' work for them by interpreting the movies on their behalf. But all pretentious analysis aside, for decades, they've been more than happy to sit down for lengthy interviews where they discuss the down and dirty nuts and bolts of their craft. And of course, everyone always asks, how do they divide up their duties as writers, directors, editors, and producers? But it seems like it boils down to whenever a member of the crew has a question, whichever brother is closest is going to give the answer. They quite literally finish one another's sentences, and I'm not really sure how aware they are of how frequently they do so. What I found most interesting about their many interviews was how they write their scripts instinctively without any outline in advance, unless they're adapting someone else's work. But anything is pretty much fair game in the writing process, except for sentimentality, which they avoid like the plague. But once they're on the set, they more or less stick to the script and their storyboards. They plan extensively ahead of time, and when talking to film critic Mark Kermode about their thoughts on improvisation, Joel Coen said, "We're just not built that way, quite the opposite in fact." And a perfect example is Josh Brolin's pride in managing to ad-lib one grunt in No Country for Old Men, a staggering contribution in his eyes.
We should have something here, like he's deciding, okay, the day is going to change, or yes, I'll take the money, or I see where we're going here. So we tried different. What ends up in the movie is,
Of course, you can't discuss the Coens without giving a shout out to their many collaborators, many of whom they've been working with since the beginning of their careers. Joel Coen first worked as an assistant editor in Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, the beginning of this beautiful filmmaking friendship. The Coens basically used Sam Raimi's playbook for raising money for their first movie by making the trailer to Blood Simple before they shot the movie. And if you pay close attention, you'll see a cameo by Bruce Campbell. And over the years, the Coens and Sam Raimi have done tons of stuff together, like cameos in comedy classics like Spies Like Us.
Drive-in is closed.
We're with the Ace Tomato Company.
Or my favorite example, Sam Raimi's cameo in Miller's Crossing when he gets mowed down in a hail of bullets. But arguably the Coens' most important collaborator is composer Carter Burwell, who's been working with them since Blood Simple, with the occasional contributions over the years by T-Bone Burnett. As far as the look of their movies go, they used D.P. Barry Sonnenfeld on their first 3 features. The great Roger Deakins has shot 12 of their movies, and recently Bruno Delbonnel has been making a name for himself on flicks like Inside Llewyn Davis, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and The Tragedy of Macbeth. But in the end, it's the actors and their stock company that people always think of. Actors who frequently deliver the best performances of their careers when working with the Coen Brothers. Frances McDormand's appeared in 9 of their movies. Steve Buscemi and John Goodman have each appeared in 7. John Polito and Stephen Root have each appeared in 5. John Turturro and George Clooney have both appeared in 4. The list just goes on and on and on. And speaking of lists, let's get to mine already. These lists are really only worth doing when some good ones don't make the cut. And I changed my top 5 for this list repeatedly because every time I watch one of the movies in question, I have to kind of shuffle the deck. So if you notice a discrepancy between what I say here and what I said back in my Macbeth video, my only defense is that 5 minutes after posting this video, I will likely change my mind again. When it comes to their filmography, these top 5 slots are all very competitive. But let's ease into things with my number 10, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, specifically the first short film in their anthology movie. The Coens have shot a lot of great short films over the years, but this one is the heavyweight champion. Like with many of their projects throughout their careers, the script for this short basically sat in a drawer gathering dust for many years before they finally circled back to it, but the wait was well worth it. I basically scream and laugh with complete joy each time I watch this film, and this is only my number 10, so I'm rapidly going to run out of adjectives as I try and give adequate praise to each film on this list. So number 9, this one tore me up. I went back and forth between 2 options. I rewatched the movies, I listened to interviews related to the films, and I'm still not satisfied that I've got it right. The 2 choices are Inside Llewyn Davis, a love song to the neighborhood where I've lived for the last 10 years, and True Grit, a damn fine adaptation of one of the best Western novels I've ever read. In the end, as much as I love Westerns, I'm going to go with Inside Llewyn Davis, a film which basically took the style of the cover to the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan and expanded it into an entire film. The early 60s folk scene in New York was such a delightfully strange pop culture time capsule, and I can't think of any filmmakers who have ever lived who could have captured it better, so who knows, in 5 minutes, I might switch back to True Grit. But let's move on to my number 8, the film that started it all, Blood Simple. In an interview with Guillermo del Toro, the Coens discussed how the first 100 feet of film shot by a director can tell you a lot about where their career might go, and I 100% agree. Blood Simple is one of the best filmmaking debuts I've ever seen, a film noir on steroids set in West Texas. I love how the Coens tend to set their thrillers in remote environments instead of the big city, opening the door to all kinds of eccentric characters like the legendary amoral private detective played by M. Emmett Walsh, the first but certainly not the last time the Coens wrote a part with a specific actor in mind. And speaking of writing eccentric characters for a specific actor, that perfectly tees up my number 7, Barton Fink, starring John Turturro. A film which the Coens famously wrote as a way of kind of shaking off the creative cobwebs while they were struggling with the script of Miller's Crossing. And the movie absolutely dominated at the Cannes Film Festival, picking up multiple awards, turning the Coens into critical darlings for all time. And there are many reasons to love this movie, like its depiction of a writer who eerily resembles the great William Faulkner, but for me, this is the Tony Shalhoub show, who plays the best movie producer I've ever seen depicted on the screen. If you're obsessed with old movies, his performance alone makes this movie required viewing.
Talk to another writer.
Who?
Oh, Jesus. You throw a rock in here, you'll hit one. Do me a favor, Fink. Throw it hard.
Number 6, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? When this movie came out, I was stuck in Las Vegas for a few weeks working in the accounting department on the movie America's Sweethearts, and the casino hotel where I was staying had a theater in the basement, but the only movie they were playing which grabbed my attention was this one, so I just kept going back, eventually seeing it 5 times total, and I loved it each and every single time I saw it. And if you're wondering why I wasn't on the casino floor pissing away my per diem, I did plenty of that as well. But after a couple days in Vegas, you start to hear the sound of slot machines in your sleep, and if you don't take a break, you will go stark raving nuts. But getting back to this movie, the Coens famously called it an adaptation of the Odyssey, in spite of the fact that neither of them ever bothered to read Homer's original epic. I think Tim Blake Nelson is the only person on the crew who had actually read the Odyssey. But the irony is that the movie got nominated for an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, which tells you all you need to know about a town which is rather notorious for not liking to read. But the real reason I kept going back to this movie over and over is because the music, which is absolutely glorious, and the movie made me laugh and laugh and laugh, and in the end, that's enough. And while we're on the subject of laughter, let's get to 2 of the best comedies ever made. For my number 5, we have the very first Coen Brothers movie I ever saw, Raising Arizona. Not only is the movie funny as fucking shit, visually it is stylish as hell, one of those movies that can only be made by young directors where they're essentially showing off every trick of the book, almost as if they're trying to test the physical limits of the grammar of cinema. By comparison, most conventional comedies look like they were shot in a fashion where it's a miracle someone even bothered to turn on the camera. But on top of all the eye-popping visual storytelling, the cast is absolutely first-rate, resulting in one of the most quotable movies ever made.
And when there was no meat, we ate fowl. And there was no fowl, we ate crawdad. And when there was no crawdad to be found, we ate sand.
You ate what?
We ate sand.
You ate sand?
That's right.
And depending upon my mood, this could have taken the number 1 slot, but you could say the same for all the movies I'm about to discuss. So for the number 4 slot, we have what might be the most popular movie the Coens ever made, not upon initial release where it was kind of a flop, but on video and DVD, this movie took off like a rocket. I'm talking about the ultimate 90s cult classic, The Big Lebowski. If you're able to quote this movie backwards and forwards, well then I can safely say in advance, we can be friends for life. I only spent 7 years in Los Angeles, but this is my favorite movie about Los Angeles that I've ever seen. It perfectly captures all the truly deranged individuals that you can expect to encounter on any given day. And there's something about the detective genre that goes hand in glove with the City of the Angels. Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye is another great example. And obviously the dude is hardly Philip Marlowe, but like with Howard Hawks' classic The Big Sleep, the plot of any great whodunit is almost immaterial. All you need is great scenes and the audience will just roll with it, and I think people will continue to just roll with it with The Big Lebowski for many more years to come.
Vagina.
Number 3, The Great Miller's Crossing. Now, I try not to use this word lightly, but Miller's Crossing for me is one of the few movies I would describe as perfect. The first time through, you can get a little dizzy following the ins and outs of the plot, but once you're over the hump, this movie puts the viewer in a state that I can only describe as euphoria. With this movie, the Coens take everything great about prohibition-era gangster movies and then basically throws gasoline on a brush fire, giving us the best photography, the best music, the best dialogue, the best shootouts, and the best characters you could ever hope to see in this classic genre. And if you want to play a really fun drinking game, see what happens if you take a shot of booze every time Tom gets either punched or kicked. You won't make it past the first act. But Gabriel Byrne, Albert Finney, Marcia Gay Harden, John Turturro, John Polito, they all hit career highs with this movie. And I doubt if we'll ever see another Prohibition-era gangster movie again as wildly entertaining as this one. Moving on to number 2, No Country for Old Men. This is a movie that's so good, it makes one wonder about the possibilities of an alternate reality where the Coens devoted more time to adapting great books instead of writing so many great original screenplays. Based on the evidence of the 2 movies No Country for Old Men and True Grit, the Coens clearly have an aptitude for working with other people's material, and I've heard rumors for years that they want to tackle Elmore Leonard's novel Cuba Libre, a possibility that just makes me salivate. But the good news is that we have this one to chew on until the end of time. Each time I see it, it's like watching with fresh eyes where the world's coolest thriller slowly metamorphosizes into this profound meditation on the nature of evil in an ever-evolving world. And speaking of which, if the Coens ever wanted to do Blood Meridian, I would not complain. But Javier Bardem, he's so intense and terrifying in this movie that it almost breaks the story. But luckily, Josh Brolin and Tommy Lee Jones, they're able to kind of keep the movie in balance, delivering astonishing performances of their own.
And you have to say, call it.
Well, look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
Artistically, this movie might end up being the high watermark for Joel and Ethan Coen, but I have one final movie that remains my personal favorite, and that is, of course, Fargo, easily one of the most original movies ever conceived by human beings. It's a movie which perfectly illustrates just how important a locale can be to defining the world in which a story unfolds. Don't just set your movie in a city. Pick a very specific city and flesh it out with the appropriate dialect and characters and atmosphere and tone. The world in which this story unfolds is just unique. It's one of those rare flicks that has everything you want to see in a movie, from horrific brutality to astonishing comedy to hysterical sex scenes.
So, you were having sex with a little fella then?
Uh-huh.
Is there anything else you can tell me about him?
No. Like I say, he was funny looking. More than most people, even.
And obviously some of the best goddamn dialogue any audience has ever been privileged to listen to. When it comes to pure, raw cinema, the look and sounds of this film place a spell on me each and every time I watch it.
End of story.
Well, what this guy look like, anyways?
Oh, he's a
Little guy, kind of funny looking.
But that's all I have for now. As always, when I do these top 10 lists, I always swear that I'm going to start cranking them out on a more regular basis. I want to do one for Paul Verhoeven. I want to do one for a lot of different filmmakers, but they're kind of time-consuming to do, but I get a lot of pleasure out of doing them. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff. And if you have any requests, I don't know. I've got so many directors that I want to get to. I don't know if I'm open to requests, but if you have a great idea, I'm always willing to listen. But if you want to talk more, hunt me down on Twitter or leave a comment in the comments below. Can't thank you enough for listening and watching, etc. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.